Hello, welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. I'm your host, James Mackey. Thank you for joining us today. We got a really fun episode for you. We're going to be discussing how to connect business outcomes with people strategy, how to drive alignment between CEOs and CPOs, and different things when it comes to workforce planning and what we're seeing on the market today, and really bringing in the human and people aspect to again drive business outcomes. So that's going to be the primary focus. And today we're joined by Yogi Panjabi. Yogi, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Wonderful, James. Delighted to be here. Huge fan of the show, everything you're doing. So delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your background and what you're working on. I want to make sure all the executives tuning in will understand your perspective on the topics we're discussing today.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. And as a founder now, hugely inspired by your journey, James, and everything that you're doing in the recruiting world. My journey began a little bit all over the map. I started in the world of strategy, spent a decade in that world, and then I got lost on the enterprise trail. Went from the world of strategy to the world of sales and marketing, from there to the world of product, from there to the world of IT. And finally, I found myself in the midst of people. And I have found that really great things happen at intersections. I was fortunate to be at this people and IT intersection in my role at Palo Alto Networks. And I was also fortunate to have been groomed by a number of mentors inside each of these functions that allowed me to really bring what I knew to a world where I had to learn so much from. And so at Palo Alto Networks, I sat inside this people team leading up the people tech and people analytics function. And what we did was really focus on employees and think about tech and data in their world, trying to solve for business problems using the insights that we generated from systems around them, and also enhance the experiences that we brought into their world. My journey into entrepreneurship we'll get into in a few moments.
Okay, good stuff. So I would love to learn a little bit more about your business, PeopleLens. Can you tell me specifically what problem you guys are solving? I just want to get a sense for, what problem it is and why you felt it was, so important that you had to start a business to solve it.
Yeah. So in my last role, we were at Palo Alto Networks, and what we saw there was a business that had grown with a single product, was wildly successful, had gone IPO. And then in the cybersecurity landscape, the macro around us was where our customers bought from 200 other vendors, including ourselves. And so we had to broaden our footprint. New leadership, new board members came along, and off we went on the acquisition trail. 17 acquisitions over 5 to 6 quarters. We really broadened our footprint. And what we saw was stock revenue all nicely doubled. And then we hit a bunch of speed bumps. Stock dropped dramatically as we missed our quarter twice in a row. And we began to scratch our heads. We threw more sales ops, more strategy consultants, more customer insights at the problem. We weren't quite able to identify what we needed to do. And then we put our lens on ourselves. We looked inward. We began to focus on our teams, on our sales teams, on our people. And as we put the people lens on, we saw Mike, that rep on the front line. He needed help. He had grown up as a box seller. As we began to help him with product knowledge, with consultative skills, with mindset, we helped Mike go from that world of a 50K box seller to the world of a 7-figure SaaS seller. And in that pain, our mission became pretty clear, which is to make every rep better and every manager a better coach in the world of sales. And that's what we do at PeopleLens. And so we saw the pain there, but then it was about really moving on from there to the world of entrepreneurship. We were fortunate to put a wonderful team together, a team of machine learning wizards coupled with a bunch of go-to-market advisors that have been partners on this journey. And of course, the family has blessed it, and we are on the entrepreneur adventure.
Okay, so it's the AI-driven SaaS platform, and it's basically helping reps produce better outcomes. Is it like providing feedback on sales calls, or like in terms of the tactical, like what is it exactly doing there? Like I get the outcome idea of like making people more productive and successful, but how is it doing that?
Yeah, great question, James. So what we do is we focus on the person inside the salesperson. In our time in the world of people and sales tech, what we observed was the lens was on the customer. The rep was largely ignored. And so we put the lens, or we put the person at the center of the equation, and to begin to serve them, their attributes, their activities, their competencies. We bring data sets from well beyond the world of customer systems, and we augment and we widen the aperture. We bring in org data sets from the world of org and people, your productivity systems, and from the world of people and people systems, your HRIS, your learning systems, to really help that rep identify what's the attribute, what's the activity. It could be their time allocation, it could be their pipeline discipline, it could be their product knowledge. Really surfacing what matters for a given rep in their flow of work and serving that up to them, not to the manager, but to themselves. Not serving them a dashboard, but serving them with precision, the answer that they need to hear to up their game around.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that helps me understand your perspective and background a little bit more, which will be good to understand where you're coming from on the topics we want to talk about today. So one of the things, just at a very high level, like we want to discuss as one of the first topics, is getting into how to connect business outcomes with people strategy and make sure that there's really strong alignment. And in terms of application, how to drive alignment in the CEO and CPO relationship. So, I think that we should get into that. I mean, where do you see companies? Where do you see missed opportunities here when it's like you don't see like the people strategy, hiring strategy, and whatnot, not aligned with companies, the Northstar metrics that companies want to hit?
Yeah, great question, James. What we've generally seen and studied is traditionally companies were product centric or finance centric or sales centric. And the CEO bonded with the product leader or the technology leader, or maybe if they were finance led, they bonded with the CFO, or many times it was sales and the CRO and the CEO were quite seldom in that bond. People leaders, on the other hand, have seldom made it to that top bracket. And what we've observed is that in our little journey, when that happens, there's serious magic. You can really tightly couple your business priorities with your people elements. And what we found, again, at Palo Alto Networks, and we are fortunate to see from the sidelines, is that magic was very, very visible, and it showed up in numbers.
Gotcha. And specifically for CEO and CPO, that relationship and driving alignment there, what do you think are the most important aspects? Like, I have some thoughts here on this as well, but would love to get your thoughts on how do you identify like what a good CEO CPO relationship looks like?
Yeah. What I've observed is the CEO is actively seeking out the people leader on their top business pain, as opposed to going to them, after a half-baked plan has been thought up or a business problem has been attempted in a few different places. and where they are really bonding at that level is really important. How do we see that translate into reality and into day to day? For example, the number of board meetings that a people leader could be participating in, or how important is people and culture in living in the day to day, and how your hiring plays out with that people centricity and with that culture centricity. Are your hires and are your leaders really embracing those elements? And so those are quite central. Another example that I have found quite meaningful is when you really couple those two, you pick a problem that might be a business problem. And let's say it's really, hey, my product in the hands of customers is not quite performing. My NPS is not where it could be, or my bugs in my product are really at a high number, and that's showing up in my tickets. And there is a problem. It could largely be limited to a product problem and left at that. But as you begin to couple business and people strategies, you begin to see what's really the pain. And you begin to look at the product team. As you look at the construction of the product team, you begin to see it could be a design component. What's the percentage of designers on that team? At what points were they introduced in that product? And that's what we found to be quite revealing, to identify what that pain is and tightly couple that with people. We found the answers to be much more solid and solving for the intrinsics.
So another point that I wanted to make too is that I think from a CPO perspective and even like a VP perspective, there needs to be, when you get to that executive level, a deeper understanding on like being analytical spreadsheets, understanding the unit economics of running an effective company, of budget, of how much headcount a company truly needs, and being able to be like more so a strategic partner, opposed to just saying, okay, the VP of product says they need 20 people this year. Okay, how are we going to get those 20 people? To actually truly evaluating, like, does the VP of product, for instance, really need 20 people, and why? And partnering with finance and being able to dive into a spreadsheet and not just say, like, do we have the budget for this, but what's actually going to be the most effective way to run this department? And if we truly have all of the ducks in a row, everything that is needed to evaluate whether or not this headcount makes sense. And so, I think to some extent it comes down to putting in a lot of process in place and making sure that it truly is a game plan. Has each position been mapped out to understand what success looks like, and why this additional headcount is actually going to be necessary to drive a specific outcome? And other leaders need to be able to articulate that. And I think a CPO has to be the one to really pump the brakes and say, hey, we don't really have all the data that we need yet in order to determine whether or not this headcount makes sense. And again, a CPO needs to know how to align with a chief financial officer to get into the weeds of really understanding if it does make sense to hire additional headcount, and to try to avoid things like to overhiring, right? Which which can lead to additional layoffs. And particularly over the past couple of years, we've seen how devastating layoffs can be to culture and how it can take years to rebuild. So I think part of that CPO role is too, just how do we prevent overhiring? How do we make sure that we have a good understanding of which hires are going to really drive the organization forward, and then understanding performance metrics, and is there's clear outcomes associated to the roles that we are hiring for. And so I think it's really coming down to CEO setting the vision, and CPO making sure from a headcount perspective we are not overhiring, we're hiring the right people, we're getting the most out of those people. And I think too, it's like I try to, like, I've done some research into what's going on with Apple, right? Because Apple is one of the only big tech companies that's been able to avoid layoffs. And it's just interesting to dive into that. I mean, I think that there's aspects that may not be directly tied to people, like being in a really strong financial position. They have also like a lot of diversified revenue streams. right? Like several different products, like, from obviously like all the hardware that they provide, like Macs and stuff like that, to software services through like the App Store, iCloud, Apple Music. So there's a lot of different segments out there that I think make them probably, or product lines that make them really strong. And then obviously like strategic planning. So you have all of those things, which are kind of, they're obviously a lot more broad and complex potentially than just like focusing in on people strategy. But then you look at things like, okay, as it relates to people strategy, like from the things that we just mentioned, to really understanding each role within the organization, why it's important, why they need to hire for, and making sure that they're not overhiring, getting the right people in, and actually building an efficient organization. I think too, from some of the research I did, it appears that they've done a pretty good job retraining and reskilling. So from a workforce management perspective, it seems like they have a lot of programs in place to actually help employees have a different point of impact within the organization. So I think that, long story short, I think that a big part of from a people leadership perspective is, how do we build an efficient organization that we don't have a lot of waste, right? And we make sure that we're setting up our folks for success. We know what success looks like, and we can hopefully have some programs in place from a workforce management perspective to do what we can to avoid layoffs, which is again top of mind for everybody right now. So I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on this, and if there's anything else you kind of have to add on what the role of the CPO looks like, and how they should be interacting with the other executives on their team.
Yeah, James, love your perspective there, and spot on. I think the CEO and the CPO, and the CPO being that leader of the resources, has that ownership, and like you just beautifully pointed out with an example, how Apple has been able to manage that through the last 12 months and through these softer economic climes is a very, very ripe example. I think another strong element is being able to really attract the right talent based on where your product is going and where your industry is going. And so we had examples from Intel missed the mobile wave a decade and a half back, or Microsoft a decade and a half back missed another wave, and of course now is catching up. And so there are multiple strategies on how you can align your skills and your capabilities based on where your industry is going. And the people leader, as they harness that context, they have to be building out that capability. And so what I've observed is, again, folks that are able to do that well are able to see around the corner on where that industry is going, and be able to partner with their leadership to be ahead and bring in those resources, because that's where the industry is going, and that's where their skill base ought to be.
For sure. Well, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm really curious to see too just how people leadership evolves over the next couple of years. It seems to me that it's a lot harder than it used to be, just given the current economic climate, and it's just so unstable and changing so often. So I think just getting this right is becoming increasingly hard and a moving target. I mean, performance metrics are really hard right now, because it's, what does normal look like? How can we look at trend reports and benchmarking data to really evaluate what performance should look like, particularly when it comes to like revenue roles, right? Like everything's getting thrown off, like from close rates to, length of the sale to even ICP, my ideal customer profiles might be shifting. And then it's like, how does that impact hiring plans, right? Like, as you hire new reps, like they're going to have a ramp time. They're not probably going to have the same close rate as experienced reps. And so not only is it hard to benchmark for experienced reps, but how do you define like how many new reps you should be bringing on? And again, there's all of this stuff is, as you mentioned, all the interesting stuff happens at the intersection, right? It's just becoming increasingly difficult to get hiring plans right and understand what success looks like in the role, and how we're kind of pivoting what success looks like based on market conditions and whatnot. So I just see that CPO role continuing to evolve into like a much more analytical position, where it's not just about compliance and hiring process, to really understanding, again, like what's happening in the economy, what the Northstar metrics are of the business, and being a true partner and actually making sure that other departments have clarity into if they really do need to hire and if they really do have clarity into what success looks like, and being more so part of like that approval process of being an active partner and deciding if roles need to be opened versus just facilitating roles being opened, facilitating hiring outcomes and facilitating ongoing people management. Like it's more of a almost like I feel like almost like a gatekeeping responsibility of like, hey, we need to make sure that we are actually ready to make these hires, or we're ready to expand the organization. Like I feel like that's becoming more of a priority these days.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That role is an extremely tough job, from the few that I interact with, and the pendulum seems to swing pretty quickly. At least in the last 3 years, it swung a few times, and now they're trying to figure out, where's it going to go next. So it is a extremely tough job. It requires that nimbleness to operate in that world, and we have a huge burnout in that world and in that leadership, because it is a terribly lonely world as well. And so it's important to recognize that as we think about where this is going. Analytics is a important component of that role, increasingly so, as is technology and experiences. And in my past, again, we were fortunate to lead that team, the people tech and people analytics team. And good leaders bring that insight, bring those data sets from their world, and are the voice and are the representation of those data sets with the audiences and with their peer group. And so that as we make decisions around hiring or around really plateauing on a certain area, that's armed with what's happening in the external world as well as what's happening inside our own workforce, and how are the troops feeling and what the motivation level is, to help guide the company with an excited workforce.
So that's another thing I know we had discussed talking about today, is really getting into employee experiences, which I really want to do. I think before we jump into that, actually, in terms of the data sets and the analytics, I would love to get a sense specifically for what were you tracking in that role, right? As VP of, I think it was technology analytics. I would love to, at Palo Alto, I would love to get a sense for like, what were the specific data points, metrics that you really were leveraging to drive outcomes?
Yeah, great question. And again, we were fortunate to have a leader that was first a business leader, and then made sure that as we represented the voice of people and our people insights in those forums, whether it was board meetings or whether it was QBRs, there was a people section literally to those decks, so that we had the opportunity to dive in. And the way we thought about people analytics and about data in our world was, it was really a representation of our employees. We put the employee at the center, thought about their 360. And of course, we looked at data inside HR systems, your HRIS, your learning systems, your compensation systems, but we, again, widened the aperture. We augmented that with data in the world of sales performance, in the world of financial performance. And for example, trying to answer the question, hey, how does my reps enablement play out in their growth or in the top line performance of a company? Or which competencies lead to higher outcomes? And being able to bring those data sets together to answer business questions helped us inform our peers and our leadership group, really to make good, sound decisions. That was very evident by data from within our teams, and brought that wider enterprise lens to our decision making.
Gotcha. And so can you give me an example about, like, I think you mentioned like reps and enablement. Could you give us another like couple examples of what you tried to learn through people tech and analytics? Like, what were a couple other use cases in which you were using analytics to drive talent and people strategy and business outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So within each area, so if you think about the world of recruiting, and recruiting isn't hard today, but it's gonna come back at some point, and now might be that opportunity to do the hard work. So if you just think about the recruiting journey, and again, put the candidate or put the employee at the center, think about them as the audience we are serving, and you think about the different steps in that journey, going from the world of sourcing to assessment to recruiting to the decision committee meetings to putting out an offer and then bringing them on. There are 3 or 4 functions really participating in that journey. It could be the world of finance, it could be the world of IT, it could be the world of workplace, and of course, recruiting in HR. How do these groups really come together to think about the experiences, the touch points, the systems, and then paint those with the candidate at the center, so that what the candidate sees is one seamless experience, as opposed to logging in, logging out, as opposed to trying to copy and paste information from one step to the other, and trying to paste their background information from one system to another, or from one vendor to another. And it takes an army, it takes a cross-functional lens that we ought to bring to our employees and our stakeholders and our candidates. And so that's just an example from the world of recruiting. If you think about, internal transfers, similar lens, how do you think about competencies and open positions, and being able to really put the current employee in that position of power, as we think about putting them at the center and being able to give them the option to make career choices, as opposed to look outside. What can we do to shape the competencies and create those opportunities for them to grow inside the company, and being able to, again, stitch those and deliver those in seamless experiences, and use the underlying data that we have inside a few of our systems, surfacing that, painting a lens for that rep or for that manager or for that leader to be pointing them to a direction where they can grow their career very much inside the company.
And I think this is a good segue into talking about creating exceptional employee experiences and an employee journey. And it's, again, what I like about what you're saying is it's not just about creating great experiences and helping folks move up within their career, but it's like, how are you actually tying that to producing the business outcomes that you're trying to create? And so could you tell us, from your perspective, walk us through what you feel like an employee journey should look like, more so beyond the data aspect. What are you trying to create when you think about trying to create exceptional employee experiences? How do you, an application, do that?
Yeah, so if we look at what we are experiencing today in our world, we clearly are driven by ChatGPT and the craziness, or the experiences around it. The world of consumer is leading in tech adoption in terms of experiences, and enterprises are definitely catching up. But if we look inside the enterprise, and you look around the systems, you look around maturity, you look around the set of experiences, the CRM is really the center of that ecosystem, and the lens is on the customer. Within that CRM, CRM is essentially a very, very powerful database with a bunch of attributes and fields around your customers, but the lens is on the customer in that ecosystem. If we think about first principles, where we have product at the center, the customer on one hand, and the rep on the other, the rep is largely ignored, that employee is largely ignored, and there's a need to begin to serve that employee. And so if you're able to carve up the experiences, with the rep as an example, it could be pretty much a finance employee, it could be an IT employee, it could be an employee in your supply chain. But if you think about the world of sales, if you're able to create again, a lens for them that is putting them at the center and serving them on the OKRs that they're going after. Where do they need to be? Where do they need to be able to hit the manager's top line, the organization's top line, the company's top line, and breaking that down, not in terms of dashboards that are relevant for the corner office, but for them, and bringing that level of experience. The way I see that is, in the context of the organization, is good people attract good people. And, we all say A's attract A's. Good work really energizes folks and gives them that purpose. But good experiences really creates that thrill and that excitement and that aha, just like ChatGPT has done for all of us in our consumer app. So I think there's an opportunity for us as leaders in that world to shape that level of aha for our employees.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, as you said, opposed to like company-wide dashboards or department-wide dashboards, it's like actually providing analytics for each individual rep. I think it's important as part of their development. To dive a little bit further into ChatGPT, how do you see, I would love to specifically for generative AI, how do you see that integrating within the concepts of employee experience?
Yeah, great question. In all candor, we all are playing with it to figure that out. If I were to bring my crystal ball, what I see happening is clearly consumers are at the leading edge of this, and we play with it, and have been for the last 4 months, and have played with other language models, and as language models and AI models continue to go mainstream, that's going to be, again, largely driven by our consumer activity, and we're going to bring enterprise use cases and feed them into that world, and we'll have a few security blow-ups along that journey. But it's going to be largely consumer driven as we start, and then over time, what's going to happen is we see some of our existing vendors, some of our existing systems, we win elements that feed into our workflow. So today, if you begin to copy data from one system to another or write your own scripts, I think that's going to go to the world of questioning as opposed to writing, and our role will become editing. So we'll see nice and tightly coupled ChatGPT experiences with human experiences that are sandwiched in a few different layers to make that really the end product better. The human experiences pop, and everyone's going to feel a lot more productive about those experiences. And so if we think about one specific example, is you'd say, hey, the world of dashboards that were created by a certain group that were then distributed across the company to the corner offices. You use the BI dashboard, pick your tool. We see that happening much more in terms of using the world of language models, AI models. Of course, text has a place in dashboard, but it has to be tightly coupled with numbers. And so those dashboards are being now created not just for the corner office, but for the front lines. It took the message from corner offices to front lines maybe a few quarters to trickle down. And so being able to give every James, every Yogi their own view into the world and do so in real time, and also do so with an answer, because all of us are not quite trained with our analyst hat to be able to interpret how two numbers come together and what's the so what for me. And so those answers are becoming or will become much more widespread as we think about that, much more personalized. And so this world will see a quantum leap on two fronts. One is on the workflow side of the house, where those experiences will be nicely sandwiched. And the other is the insights and the answers will get just far brighter, more connected, wider data sets, and more pointed in our answers, as opposed to a set of 10 or 15 best practices and then you go figure out. And so answers and workflows will really take a quantum leap as this further plays out.
I think so. I think so. It's very exciting. I'm excited to see what happens over the next couple of years for sure. Everything's changing so fast at this time. Well, hey, look, this is a good stopping point. I think we're coming up on time here. Yogi, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing all of your insights with our audience.
Fabulous conversation, James. Love what you're doing and the message that you're putting out and the people that you're bringing in. At the end of the day, this is really about the people, and glad to hear the SecureVision story and chat with your audiences.
Yes, absolutely. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us today. If you know of anybody that would like to be on the show, or maybe you would, definitely reach out at talenttrends.io. And if there's any topics that you would like for us to discuss on the show, you can use the same email for applications that's on talenttrends.io to share your thoughts on additional topics that you'd like us to discuss. If you feel like you're getting value from the show, we always appreciate reviews. If you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be so helpful. So thank you so much. And we are looking forward to seeing you next time. We are publishing an episode every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 a.m. Eastern time. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you real soon. Take care.